Yes, coming up to the big 250th anniversary of Napoleon's birthday in a month, August 15th. What is it now? July 22nd. So yeah, coming up. Also my wedding anniversary tomorrow, July 23rd. 8 years since Chrissy and I got married. And just over 11 years since we met in Ajaccio. At a Napoleon conference. So I don't know. It's going to be a quiet week because Tony's in Scotland, Ray's going to Scotland, something's going on in Scotland, nobody invited me. So I thought I'd do a bit more live shows this week and just make some stuff, just chat, seeing as I'm not going to be spending my nights doing research like I normally do. I'm available to do whatever the hell you want me to do. Normally these videos I do at night, my time, of recent weeks, and in recent weeks, and it's, I guess, because of the time zone issues, it's only Aussies that get to participate mostly. And nothing much happens, so I'm doing one sort of in the American time zone tonight to see if the Americans and the Brits, I'm not sure what time is it in the UK right now. London, 2 a.m. Okay, so maybe the Brits aren't involved. Americans, if you want to ask me any questions. Tony, yes, I'm celebrating Napoleon walking on the moon. If Napoleon had been around in 1969, he would have been, the French would have been the first to do that, no doubt. No, he wasn't. See, Napoleon wasn't big on, wasn't a big fast adopter of technology, unfortunately. Like balloons, he could have used balloons. Didn't get on the balloon thing. Lots of things he didn't get on. Mobile phones. He looked at the iPhone. He went, can't see it happening. Can't see people paying $1,000 for that. So there you go. He wasn't perfect. Okay, questions are coming. That's great. Daniel Burkle wants to know when my Jesus movie is coming out. Fucking hell, how many times do I need to answer this question, Daniel? I've answered this 1,000,000 times, I think, but one more time for Daniel. Kidding, Daniel. Sorry. So here's the thing with the film is I don't know when it's coming out. There's no way of knowing, but I'll give you the rough timeline. So we're nearly finished. Basically, where it's at is everything's been done. I've done my director's edit, and I've sent that to the editor, the real editor, who will starting this week. He's going to do the well, it's not the live show, Daniel. I've talked about it in other places, but it's all right. I'm just joshing with you, Daniel. Chill. I'm just being a dick. Don't worry about it. Sorry, I should obey my DVAC rule. So I'm just waiting on about 15 seconds of animation to come from my animator who's in the Ukraine. Great guy. He's done a bunch of animation for the film. And we're just waiting for about 15 or 20 seconds of animation for one of the final sequences. Should have been done a couple of months ago, but he's slow, and then he sent me some stuff, and I went, it doesn't work for me, so we've gone backwards and forwards trying to make it pop, because it's got to pop. So what I've tried to do with the film is, rather than joke around a lot, as I am wont to do, particularly when talking about Christianity, the way I've tried to structure the film is I am mostly fairly serious and straight whilst narrating the film. But then I use animation, a lot of animation, to bring the comedic value, to have some fun with it, right? So it'll be me, bunch of scholars, and then a little bit of animation for the laughs. So hopefully it enables us to have some fun with it and provide some laughs, but at the same time, it's not me being mean to Christians. Because if it was just me doing it to camera, people would get offended. But if we do it in the animation, hopefully it's less offensive to the Christians. So anyway, so the bottom line is we're starting the final editing process. Everything else is ready. When the final animation comes through, it'll be done. Then we need to try and sell it. So then my producer, Torsten Hoffman, has to fly around the world and try and get a distribution company to buy it. Distribution company is the people that put it on TV or put it into cinemas or sell it online, or Netflix, TV stations, blah 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 blah. So we need to try and sell it to them, so they will then screen it to their audiences. Now, honestly, it's a low budget documentary. I think we've spent about 70-80 grand on it, which is low budget for a documentary. Most documentaries you see on TV or on Netflix or whatever, you're looking at budgets of $500,000, $500,000 to $1 million and above in terms of production budgets. We did this on 70 to 80 grand. So it's low budget, which means that in terms of aesthetic value, it may not be good enough for the Netflix or the ABCs or the not NPR, what do you have over there? Whatever the US public broadcaster is on TV, or the BBC to pick it up and screen. But we're going to give it a shot. It's probably not going to go to Cannes or Sundance or any of those sorts of things. I was hoping to get it into some like atheist film festivals, but the one that I knew of, which is based in San Francisco, isn't running anymore. But we'll try and get it out there. Anyway, we're going to try and sell it for probably 6 months. And then if that fails, if no one buys... Oh, okay, so there's two options there. If somebody buys it, let me have some yerba mate. If a distributor buys it, then they will release it on their timescale, and who knows what that could be. Could be the next week, could be 6 months later. If we can't sell it to a distributor, then we will put it out online ourselves. Put it up on iTunes, sell it on a website, our website, deepdivedocumentaries.com. And send it out to all of our supporters of the campaign, a free streaming link and all that kind of stuff. So, kind of depends on a lot of variables there. Daniel says he was brought up Catholic, and just hearing me on the podcast, he's come around to my point of view. Oh, that's why I support. Well, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, look, over the 15 years I've been podcasting, I know of a number of people that have come forward who said, look, I was a Christian all my life, and then I've been listening to your podcasts, and now I'm not anymore. Some are happy about that, some are not. Some are like, fuck you, you ruined my life. But look, yeah. And so what I've tried to do with the film is walk a gentle line where I want Christians to watch it, so I don't want it to be upsetting or I don't deliberately go out of the way to offend or upset or be mean or harsh. So it's fairly factual, and the reason why it's got a dozen PhD biblical scholars in it, New Testament scholars, is to show that these aren't my theories I'm putting forward here. These are look at that, my hair just blends into the ceiling here, doesn't it? It's not really good. It's not my ideas. These are fairly mainstream scholarly views on the history of Christianity and how it evolved over time. Even in that first couple of 100 years is what we're focusing on. So there you go. Robert says, low budget like an Ed Wood movie. There's a lot of dodgy special effects. It's low budget, but I've tried to make it, as aesthetically pleasing as possible. But yeah, it's low budget. A lot of talking heads is what it is. It's content heavy. You see a lot of documentaries, and there's long periods of just atmospheric vision and music in the background and voiceovers coming in. We don't have as much of that because we don't. It's hard to match a lot of the vision to the voices and stuff. So it's mostly a lot of talking heads, but scholars, you know. Ramsey says something. I'm glad you approach an academic approach to religion and just a certain political bias. Yeah, well, look, I like to think I take an academic approach to everything that I do, because I don't really have a bias on anything. I don't really care. I mean, I don't really think any of this exists. It's all just an illusion, so I don't care. I just try and look at the facts and see where that leads in everything that I do. Now, you may disagree on my interpretation of the facts, but let's start with what are the facts, try and be scholarly about that, and then we can interpret the facts based on, I don't know, our particular biases we may have. But yeah, I try and take a neutral fact-based approach on most things. And where I get into arguments with people is usually where they don't like the facts. They want to have their bias, and they don't want the facts to get in the way. Like when people will take a view on Assange is bad, or America's good, or Stalin was bad. You know, people tend to be intellectually lazy, in my experience, even academics, because that's the way humans are designed. If you read Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, books like that, it explains this quite well. Our brains evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to conserve energy for stuff that might be important. And we do that by creating heuristics, rules of thumb. We jump to conclusions because quite often when we jump to conclusions, they're right enough of the time to make that a good model. And then we can conserve our energy for thinking about the really nutty, thorny problems that are important, like how do I get food? How do I get laid? How do I defend myself from a tiger? The problem is that a lot of people use that jumping to conclusions heuristic when it comes to thinking about politics in history. They have a bias and they just jump into that when it's convenient. And also ties in with the concept of identity and the tribe that you want to belong to and how you want to perceive yourself and how you want others to perceive you. It's complicated, and it's very hard to avoid cognitive bias. It's something that I struggle with every week doing notes and doing shows, is trying to avoid my own Kelvin, our brains are conservative. Yes, our brains are conservative. And actually, Kelvin, you make a good point that the way that our brains are wired actually has a lot to do probably with where we fit on the political spectrum. Anyway, that's a whole other story. So yes, we should always strive, if we want to be intellectually rigorous and serious, we should try to take a facts up approach. Let's start with the facts that we have available to us, and quite often we don't have all of the facts or enough of the facts to state with a high degree of confidence what actually happened. But we have what we have, and then it's our job to use our understanding of human nature, our understanding of organizational cultures, and try and figure out what is most likely to have happened. But a lot of the time, particularly when we're dealing with ancient history, a lot of that is surmise, and that's all it's ever going to be. And then also, the same applies with dealing with contemporary history, where the facts aren't out yet. we're talking about what's going on in Iran at the moment, or what's going on in Syria, or what's going on inside of the White House, or what's going on in terms of the US is going after Assange, whatever, any of these contemporary issues, all of the facts aren't out. We probably won't know the facts for another 50, 60 years. So again, we have to take the evidence that we do have available to us and try and create some surmise around that that seems to be coherent and viable based on our understanding of the forces involved. Robert says, I read a book a while back called Caesar's Messiah and How the Romans Created the Myth of Jesus. Pretty good book. So, yes, let me tell you a story about that. So my film about Jesus started because of that book, Caesar's Messiah. Because I mentioned it and its theories a couple of times in the Life of Caesar show. And my producer, Torsten, was a listener of the Caesar show. He's a German guy who lives in Melbourne. And he contacted me quite a few years ago now, maybe 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And he said, hey, I'm really interested in that idea that you talked about, with the connection between Caesar and Jesus and how the Romans might have created this whole Christian thing, and I think we should do a documentary about it. And I said, look, it's interesting as a theory, but I don't believe it's solid enough to do a serious documentary about. It's a very, in terms of fringe theories, it's way out on the fringe. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's way out on the fringe. What I said though is, there is though a story that I'd like to tell. I think a better story, a more important story, is one that is academically sound and supported by scholarship, but most people don't understand it. And that's the story that I've told, which is about the early days of Christianity, because my experience over the last 20 years, as I've been studying it, because it's a subject of great fascination to me, is that not only do most non-Christians, atheists or people of other religions, not understand that story, Christians don't understand that story. Most Christians, some do, but most don't. Most of the people that I've spoken to, and I when I was interviewing the scholars for the film, most of whom are either pastors or lecturers at university, and I said, in my experience, Christians don't understand this. They were like, welcome to my fucking life. Christians of all ages don't understand the history of Christianity. They don't understand the history of Christianity as it's written in the Bible. It's not like all of this, we have extra biblical sources for this stuff. It's all based on what's in the Bible, and yet Christians don't know it. A, because they tend not to read the Bible cover to cover. They cherry pick bits and pieces, which is fine. They cherry pick the bits and pieces for inspiration or for lessons, but they don't sit down and read it. And if they do sit down and read it, they don't sit down and read it with a historical mindset. They don't sit down and try and read it to understand how it evolved. And then most of them don't read biblical New Testament scholarship. But I do, I always have, because I've always found it interesting. Because, even though I'm an atheist, I was raised a Catholic, but I've been an atheist since I was 8. It's one of the most important and influential periods, that creation of Christianity, in all of human history, certainly of Western civilization for the last few thousand years, but in terms of big things that happen in history, the rise of Christianity to a global power is right up there. And, this, as I always say, it's the story of how a fringe Jewish personality cult from the backwaters of the Roman Empire ended up taking over the Roman Empire, having the power to make or break emperors, and then basically taking over the rest of the world, except maybe China and India, although they did get to India eventually, thanks to the British. So it's a fascinating story, and something that everyone who's interested in history should really understand, whether you're a Christian or not, but particularly if you're a fucking Christian, because this is the basis of your worldview, right? You should understand it. You should have a deep, deep interest in how this all came to be. Anyway, so the whole Caesar's Messiah story, the Joseph Atwill stuff, I think is great and fascinating, and I'd love to tell it at some stage. He's already got a documentary out on it, but it's kind of dull. I'd love to tell it in my way. And I was recently listening to the Robert M. Price's podcast, Bible Geek, which if you don't listen to it and you're interested in this stuff, you should, because it's great. Robert's in the film, and I've done podcasts with him before, many, many years ago, but he's in the film. He on his podcast recently, he said he had dinner with Joseph Atwill recently, and they've done a podcast together, which will be coming out, an interview. And he's actually supportive of Atwill's theory. He thinks there's a lot going for it, which surprised me, actually, because even though Robert is a Christ myther, he's one of the better ones. He's one of the more serious ones. By the way, I do mention the Christ myth in the film, right at the end of the film. And I didn't want to make the whole film about Jesus being a myth, because A, it's a fringe position, and B, I didn't want the film to be about that, because there's more important stories that need to be told. But we do touch on it towards the end. Richard Carrier, Robert M. Price, and Raphael Atasta all talk about why they think it makes sense that Jesus was mythical. So we touch on it. So we'll see how that goes down. Yes, Daniel says Robert's a Cthulhu mythos guy. Yeah, he is. Huge comic book geek, and a huge fan of whoever wrote the Cthulhu books. I can't remember his name, but yeah, great guy, fascinating guy, and also major like Trump supporter, major right wing, fascinatingly politically. When I sent Tommy Mock to pick him up when we were in North Carolina, I said, whatever you do, don't talk politics with him, because H.P. Lovecraft, yeah, thanks, that's right. Whatever you do, don't talk politics with him, because we don't want him to get here pissed off. He's very right-wing. Kelvin says, having heard the intro to the psychopath economy, are psychopaths just more aware and proactive thinkers than the average person? No, I wouldn't put it like that. Psychopaths are broken. If you take the average human, 99% of humans, as the norm, psychopaths and the psychiatrists who specialise in psychopathy and sociopathy estimate that psychopaths are about 1% of the population, of the adult population. So they are broken, and essentially their empathy center is broken. The part of the brain that in normal people feels empathy towards other humans, we've been engineered that way thanks to evolution, that you don't want to cause hurt or pain to the fellow members of your tribe. Probably because if you did that, the tribe would knife you, or, throw you off a cliff or down the Gemonian stairs, or leave you in the desert alone while the caravan took off in the middle of the night. Basically, because you're a cunt and they want to get rid of you. So we've evolved these empathy centers to be able to understand when we've caused someone physical or emotional pain or economic pain, And most of us feel bad about that. We lose sleep, we have guilt, we have remorse. It's not that we're perfect, but we try and avoid hurting others as much as possible. There are always going to be situations where we have to for various practical reasons, but generally speaking, we try and avoid it. Try not to be assholes. The empathy center in psychopaths and sociopaths is broken. So they can do that, they can hurt other people, from killing them to firing them to basically screwing them over, and not bat an eyelid. They feel nothing. They depending on where it's probably a scale. You know, some people feel less than others. Some feel nothing. Now, as a result of that, psychopaths also have a high appetite for risk. They tend to feel like they are inherently superior to the people around them, because they don't have that empathy emotion, which means they do things that other people don't do if it's going to deliver them rewards, and consequently they tend to think of themselves as winners, #winner, and everyone else are #losers. You know, think of Donald Trump, who's probably a narcissistic psychopath. Or sociopath, maybe, depending on what happened to him in his upbringing. And so, consequently, they are willing to do things that other people aren't willing to do in order to get wealth and power and admiration, particularly if they're narcissistic. Now, the premise of my book is that most people, when they think psychopaths, thanks to Hollywood, we think serial killers. But in fact, a very small percentage of psychopaths are serial killers. Most psychopaths are probably CEOs, politicians, cardinals and popes, police chiefs, generals in the military, and the owners of small businesses, medium-sized businesses in your community. They are people who are rewarded. Their psychopathic tendencies of being able to take high risks and being able to fuck people over. And also they're very good at faking charisma. They're able to smile on camera. They're able to charm people because they've studied how to do that to get what they want. Most of us feel bad when we're being fake. Psychopaths don't. They see this as just another tool to get what they want. They don't care if they're being fake. So sometimes they become very good at it. Those characteristics are not only encouraged but rewarded by most organisations in modern times. Again, whether it's a business organisation or a political organisation or a religious organisation or the police or the military, whatever it is, the media, because they deliver the results that organisations want, particularly if organisational cultures themselves have been developed by previous psychopaths and sociopaths. And there are no mechanisms in place to prevent psychopathic behaviour from rising inside of an organisation. And so my premise is that we have a society and an economy that is run by psychopaths to a large extent. And this is on both sides of the political spectrum. Whether you're right or you're left, your organisation will be taken over by psychopaths. Religions, the police, the military, the arts, media, you name it. So we have a world that's run by psychopaths, and that's the problem. The problem with the world, the number one problem with the world today, is that our societies are run by psychopaths and sociopaths, and we need to now, it's probably always been that way. They were, in previous years gone by, they were kings and queens and emperors and shamans and dukes and whatever, right? Today we call them presidents and political leaders and prime ministers and whatever, CEOs. But they have a lot more power today than they've ever had before, thanks in part to globalization and capitalism run amok. Today they're billionaires and they have the ability to reach out around the globe, and their policies are creating climate change and not doing anything to fix climate change. and creating massive levels of tension and threat of nuclear war, etc., etc., etc. So we need to make this a priority. We need to recognize that our number one problem is psychopaths running the henhouse, and we need to figure out how to leverage their strengths, because they're not without value, but minimize their ability to damage the society. Kevin asks, could it be a survival mechanism, especially for sociopaths who experienced trauma when they were younger? Yeah, possibly. And for people who don't know the difference between psychopaths and sociopaths, it's a little bit wishy-washy in the literature, but essentially they're the same behaviourally, but psychopaths are born that way, malfunction when they're born in the brain, and sociopaths are made that way. Something bad happens to them at an early age. They experience massive trauma, and the wiring in their brain fucks up. And yeah, it could be a survival mechanism. Sure, could be just a random mutation in your genetics, like homosexuality, if you want to think of homosexuality that way, or gender dysmorphia, or whatever it is. It's just one of those things, or asthma, or dyslexia, or being left-handed, or having red hair, whatever. It's just some sort of a throwback. Yeah, but it whether it's a survival mechanism or it's just that part of your brain shuts down because of blunt force trauma, emotional blunt force trauma, psychological blunt force trauma. And you end up psychopath. So, Billy J. Terry, then back until you can afford to leave a large endowment to make your money a little more palatable. Yeah. It's podcast hosts. Yes, you leave a large endowment in your name and try, like, who did we talk about on the show recently? Colbert Show? Pew, of Pew Research. Mr. Pew was one of those guys that made America Christian in the 40s and 50s with his financial and social support of James Fifield. And, then left a big endowment. And today we associate his name with Pew Research, but did a lot of damage to the US along the way. And probably Carnegie and the Rockefellers and all those guys. Bill Gates. I mean, who knows how Bill will be remembered 100 years from now, if any of us are still around. How does this get fixed, Daniel asks? Well, what I recommend in the book is a couple of things. One is that the first step is we all need to evaluate our own moral compass, because it's very easy to get caught up in organizations with psychopathic cultures. And I know this because I worked at Microsoft. If you don't have a well-established set of personal values, morals and ethics, then it's easy to get swept up in the stream when everyone around you is doing certain things, and that's the way to, become successful. Even without being psychopathic or high on the high psychopathic scale yourself, you can get swept along in supporting their endeavors rather than saying, no, I will not do that, regardless of what it means for me in my career in this organization. You need to have a firm grip on your own values and morals. And most people, I think, don't have a framework for figuring out what that is. So we talk about how to do that in the book. I think that's the starting point. The second point is to start then to use your own moral compass for trying to change your organization where you work from within, having discussions about what are we willing to abide in our organization, and trying to bring about organizational cultural change, and also how you vote, assessing your politics by your moral compass. What is acceptable and what is not, and how do I change my society by voting according to that. But the big one is to push for organisational cultural change, to try and get investors to bring about organisations with a better quadruple bottom line, where they actually become aware of the role of psychopaths in the organisation and try and develop mechanisms to prevent those psychopaths and sociopaths from exhibiting their worst tendencies. And it's going to be hard to do, particularly when the psychopaths are in control, but that's where we need to get to. And I'm hoping smarter people than me will come along and figure out how to implement that. This book is not a cure-all. It's the beginnings of a conversation, is the way I see it. You know, when this twigged for me several years ago and I realised, oh, these people are psychopaths, it's changed the way that I read the news. When I, you know, what I say in the book is that a lot of people, when you see in the news that a cardinal's raped children or covered up the rape of children, or a politician has been, simultaneously condemning homosexuality whilst having gay trysts in bathrooms, or is lying about the causes of a war, or when police are beating people up and then covering it up, or all this kind of stuff. When these things do get discovered and they hit the media, they usually get depicted as bad eggs, or that person went awry, or it was random behaviour. Couldn't have seen that one coming. He was such a great guy, and then he just went off the rails. What I'm saying is, actually, we probably could have seen that coming, because if you sat that person down and made them do a psychopath test 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, they would have shown up as a psychopath. And then we can monitor those the same way you would monitor a known pedophile. Okay, you're free to live, but we know you have psychopathic tendencies. It's not your fault. You were born or made that way. It's just the way your brain is architected. But for the good of society, we need to monitor you. You need to have regular reviews. You need to have if you're in a position of power, you need to have some sort of behavioural review. We need a board of people who are confirmed non-psychopaths who are vetting your decisions to filter out the potential psychopathy in your decision-making process, because you're not aware of it, really. You're doing shit. Yeah, sure, we'll go kill 10,000 people. What's the problem? It's going to add another 10% to our share price. Actually, Steve, that may not be something we can abide by. So stuff like that. Kelvin says, I get the feeling Julius Caesar may have been a functional sociopath, especially when he cuts the hands off that tribe. Yeah, quite possibly. We need to. It's challenging when we're dealing with figures from ancient history. All the usual reasons that people talk about. Values were different. What about the Roman elite having sex with children all the time? Was that acceptable, or was it because of the mores of the time, or were they sociopaths? What about colonial invaders, British, Spanish, French, treating indigenous populations as subhuman? Does that make them psychopaths? Or did they genuinely think they're not humans? I mean, I don't think I'm a psychopath when I swat a fly. So was conquistador psychopath because of their treatment of the indigenous South Americans, or the British, or the whoever, Portuguese, with their treatment of colonial subjects, if they genuinely saw them as less than human? so it's complicated, always. It's not an easy thing to process, and it shouldn't be. Most things aren't easy, but it is a thing. Kelvin, isn't the test based the personal response of the psychopath? How accurate or reliable is it? Yeah, it's actually fairly reliable, because here's the thing. Psychopaths are happy to answer the questions honestly, usually, because they don't give a fuck what you think. They think of themselves as inherently superior to you. They think of themselves as a winner. They think that their characteristics are what make them superior and a winner. Like, imagine, for example, getting Donald Trump to sit the psychopath test. Do you think he would lie about his responses? Probably not, because he doesn't give a fuck what you think. That's what most psychopaths are like. They think of themselves as better than you. They think of their characteristics as positive. Now the challenge might be. By the way, I'm pitching a TV show based on this, where I and a psychiatrist travel around and try and interview CEOs and politicians and cardinals and police chiefs, and get them to sit the psychopath test live on camera, and then discuss with them on air their results and what they mean. Now there will be instances where PR people try and prevent that from happening, because they know, shit, this guy's a psychopath, and if this goes to air, we're all fucked. And what I've said to the guys who I'm working with on the TV show, that's a good thing, right? How good is it? Go, well, I want to interview Trump, and his PR people go, no, we're not doing that. I go, well, what does that tell you? Even the people who work for him don't want him to sit this test, because they know what it means, right? I think that'd be good. But yeah, generally psychopaths, I think, are happy to be honest, because they don't give a fuck. Ramsey says, it's like a Nazi commandant of a death camp said to an interrogator at the Nuremberg trials, why would I apologise? Should a rat catcher apologise for killing rats? Yeah, exactly. That is exactly a good analogy, is they honestly, genuinely don't see these people as the same species, maybe, even. I'm not talking about psychopaths, I'm talking about colonialists and Nazis. Question with the Nazis, though, is, okay, that happening when it did in the 30s and 40s, in relatively modern times, and Germany being a fairly enlightened nation before that, in terms of its social values and mores and all that kind of stuff, a Christian nation. Now, that's good or bad depending on your view of the history of Christianity and violence, but let's just say that they were as enlightened as any other country at the time. Does that mean that all of the Nazi rank and file were psychopaths? Or were the leaders psychopaths and the rest just went along with psychopathic behaviour because of fear of retribution if they didn't, or desire for reward, and they were happy to do horrendous things in order to avoid it? Or were the Nazis just able to grab that 1% of the population? If you have a population of 50 million people, you can easily find hundreds of thousands of people that are psychopaths, high on the psychopath scale, to participate in something like that. But I don't know. Or can you have entire psychopathic societies? See, this is something that I've thought about with regards to the United States, and gun control, right? From the view of the rest of the world, broadly speaking, we think the United States' culture is fucking messed up, right? particularly because of gun control, and also your prison rates and your death penalty, and all those three things in particular, are extremely abhorrent to most other Western civilized countries. And we've dealt with them decades ago. Like the last death sentence in Australia was 1967, 66 or 67, the last time anyone was executed under the death penalty in Australia. The fact that it's still happening in the States is like fucking what to us? Same with gun control, right? As you probably know, particularly if you listen to the gun control series that we did, Australia had a really bad mass shooting in 1996, and our conservative government at the time went, "That's it. We're taking away semi-automatics and handguns and that kind of stuff." And everyone went, "Yeah, fucking sure. Good thing. Good thinking. Let's do it." Pretty much no one's complained about that in the 20-odd years since. Everyone's been like, "Yeah, well, that was a good thing. So glad we did that." One good thing that John Howard did, right? So what happens, my point is, what happens when you have generations of people in the US growing up with this level of psychopathy in your society? How does that change their brains in terms of sociopathy, right? When you have school shootings where 36-year-olds get killed in class and the country still doesn't go, "We should do something about this." What does that do to the brains of the children that are growing up in that society? How does that affect them and then their empathy centers a generation or two from now? Just the psychological and emotional trauma of growing up in the United States in the late 20th and early 21st century, bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki and justifying that to yourselves. Vietnam, Nicaragua, what you've done to the people in Cuba, what you do to the people in the Middle East, and your black population and your Native American population, and just the justifications of that, the mental gymnastics that you have to do to live in that society, what that does to kids growing up in terms of the levels of sociopathy. I think it's be interesting to do some studies in that area. I'm not a psychiatrist. I just play one on TV. Last thing, Ramsey says, social Darwinism influenced all European nations and especially imperialism in giving the air of legitimacy to conquering peoples. I would say that we're all German psychopaths during this era. Short answer, no. However, authoritarian leadership established by the Prussian conquest of Germany ended any hope of viable social democracy and leaving it split between socialists, who were later influenced by the Russian Revolution, and far-right conservative leadership under the Kaiser and Bismarck. Yeah, no, you're right about the social Darwinism to a point, but to a point, right? There are levels of the impact that had on different nations during the 19th and 20th centuries. Germany obviously ended up fairly extreme, as did Italy, as did Japan, and I would argue as did the United States, but in a different way. Anyway, hold on, Ramsey again, meant that when a country was on the verge of economic disaster at the end of World War I and later Great Depression, ultimately meant, when did your hair turn white? Daniel asks. When I started doing podcasts with Ray, Daniel. No, actually, my hair started turning grey when I was 23. My dad had white hair very young. And then it's been going white ever since. But I think particularly after my oldest kids were born when I was like 30. Yes, so I look like an old man. Yes, okay. So yeah, lots of things happened in Germany as a result of the Treaty of Versailles and the Great Depression. Yeah, but it's a fascinating subject when you think about it in terms of psychopathy and sociopathy. Anywho, that's it. Thanks for asking all the great questions and participating. much better when the Americans are online than when it's just the Aussies. So props to Americans for being engaged. And we'll do this again. Have a good week. D back.